Chapter 2 B. Imperial Reorganisation. Chapter 2 B. Imperial Reorganisation. The Treaty of Paris ended the salutary neglect that had characterized 18th century policy. Before 1763, a few laws were affecting the colonies. Moreover, the custom officers had enforced the law loosely. In the early 1760s, Britain tightened its imperial control gradually. This resulted in frictions over the Sugar Act of 1764. These measures coincided with the ascent of George III, who ruled from 1760 to 1820 to the throne. One, the Writs of Assistance, 1761, a comprehensive overview. A chronological summary of main events. A. 1751-1755. The Navigation Acts and ongoing colonial smuggling heightened British efforts to enforce customs regulations. B. 1755. Writs of assistance begin to be issued to curb illegal trade, particularly in Boston amidst the French and Indian War. C. 1760. With King George II's death, new writs are required. Customs officials seek their renewal under George III. D. February 1761. James Otis Jr. challenges the legality of the writs in the Massachusetts Superior Court, arguing they violate natural rights. E. 1761-1765. The issue becomes a symbol of arbitrary British authority and feeds colonial resistance, foreshadowing future legal and constitutional disputes. Key characters. 1. James Otis Jr., former Crown advocate turned patriot. His courtroom argument against the writs is considered a foundational moment in American legal history. 2. Thomas Hutchinson, then Chief Justice of Massachusetts, presided over the 1761 hearings and ruled in favor of the Crown. Paxton and other customs officers. Petitioners seeking writs to enforce trade regulations. 4. John Adams. A witness Otis's speech as a young lawyer later recalled his inspirational force on the revolutionary cause. Quotations from key characters. A man's house is his castle, and whilst he is quiet, he is as well guarded as a prince in his castle. James Otis Jr., 1761. This assertion invokes the common law tradition to challenge British legal overreach. Then and there, the child independence was born. John Adams, later reflection. Adams emphasized the symbolic and catalytic importance of Otis's speech in shaping American resistance. Political, economic, and symbolic value. A. Political significance. 1. First challenge to British authority. The case marked one of the earliest colonial legal challenges to British authority. 2. Parliament sovereignty versus natural rights. It questions the legitimacy of parliamentary sovereignty and introduced natural rights discourse into colonial politics. 3. The seeds of the American Revolution. It laid the ideological groundwork for the constitutional crisis that would culminate in the American Revolution. B. Economic consequences. 1. Stop smuggling. The writs were designed to curtail smuggling and enforce trade laws that many colonists considered unjust. B. Economic tensions in the colonies. Their imposition exacerbated economic tensions, particularly among Boston merchants and ship owners dependent on illicit trade. C. Symbolic implications. 1. The writs as an emblem of arbitrary power. The writs became an emblem of arbitrary power and were perceived as a violation of the sanctity of private property. 2. An emergent revolutionary ideology. Arthur's argument contributed to the emergent revolutionary ideology, stressing liberty, legal restraint, and protection from tyranny. 3. Opposition to the writs of assistance cited in the Fourth Amendment of the US Constitution. The opposition to writs of assistance is frequently cited in later discussions of the Fourth Amendment to the US Constitution. Two, the Sugar Act, 1764, a comprehensive overview. A chronological summary of main events. A. 1733. The Molasses Act is passed, taxing molasses imports from non-British colonies widely evaded through smuggling. B. April 1764. The British Parliament passes the Sugar Act, also known as the American Revenue Act, to replace and strengthen enforcement of the Molasses Act. C. Summer 1764. Colonial merchants and legislatures begin protesting the act, viewing it as a threat to colonial self-government and economic freedom. D. 1765. Widespread resistance develops in tandem with opposition to the Stamp Act, culminating in more organized political resistance. E. 1766. Parliament repeals the Stamp Act, but upholds the Sugar Act, underscoring its commitment to raise revenue from the colonies. Key characters. 1. George Grenville, British Prime Minister and architect of the Sugar Act, believed colonies should help pay for their defense. 2. James Otis Jr., Massachusetts lawyer who opposed the Sugar Act and became a leading voice against taxation without representation. 3. Samuel Adams, vocal critic of British taxation, helped galvanize resistance in Massachusetts. 4. Benjamin Franklin, though more involved in opposition to the Stamp Act, his correspondence reflects a broader resistance to imperial taxation policies. Quotations from key characters. Taxation without representation is tyranny. James Otis Jr., 1761. Though more closely associated with the general anti-taxation discourse, the sentiment is reflective of opposition to the Sugar Act. The object of the Act is to raise revenue in America for the benefit of the Crown. George Grenville, Parliamentary Speech. This underscores the shift from regulation to direct taxation. If all trade may be taxed, why not our lands? Why not the produce of our lands and everything we possess or make use of? Samuel Adams, later reflection. An articulation of the slippery slope of imperial overreach. Political, economic, and symbolic value. A. Political significance. 1. The Sugar Act equaled a critical transition. The Sugar Act marked a critical transition. British policy moved from regulating trade to raising revenue directly from the colonies, thereby challenging colonial assemblies' authority. 2. The Stamp Act Congress. Debates about sovereignty, representation, and the limits of imperial power. It ignited constitutional debates about sovereignty, representation, and the limits of imperial power, debates that would escalate through the 1760s and 1770s. B. Economic consequences. 1. Strict enforcement of the Molasses Act. The Act halved the molasses tax but enforced it strictly, threatening economic collapse for merchants reliant on the rum industry. 2. New duties on foreign goods. It imposed new duties on foreign goods, sugar, wines, coffee, and tightened customs enforcement, increasing colonial cost and reducing profits from smuggling. C. Symbolic implications. 1. British intrusion into colonists' traditional rights. For colonists, the Sugar Act symbolized British intrusion into their traditional rights. 2. Galvanization of early political resistance. It galvanized early political resistance, laying ideological groundwork for later opposition to the Stamp Act and Townshend Acts. 3. No taxation without representation. The Act inaugurated the no taxation without representation doctrine as a collective colonial grievance. The Stamp Act, 1765. A comprehensive overview. A chronological summary of main events. A. March 1765. Parliament passes the Stamp Act, requiring colonists to purchase a stamp for every printed document, including newspapers, legal contracts, and licenses. B. May 1765. Virginia resolved introduced by Patrick Henry, asserting colonial rights and the illegality of taxation without representation. C. Summer 1765. Widespread protests erupt across the colonies. The Sons of Liberty are formed to resist enforcement. D. October 1765. Stamp Act Congress convenes in New York. representatives from 9 colonies petitioned the Crown for repeal. E. March 1766. Parliament repealed the Stamp Act, but simultaneously passes the Declaratory Act affirming its authority over the colonies. Key characters. 1. George Grenville, British Prime Minister and architect of the Sugar Act, believed colonies should help pay for their defense. 2. Patrick Henry, Virginia lawyer and politician, author of the radical Virginia Resolves. James Otis Jr., advocate for colonial rights and co-organizer of the Stamp Act Congress. 4. Samuel Adams, leader of the Sons of Liberty, key organizer of street-level resistance. 5. Benjamin Franklin, appeared before Parliament to argue for repeal, offered pragmatic and philosophical opposition. Quotations from key characters. Caesar is Brutus, Charles I is Cromwell, and George III may profit by their example. Patrick Henry, May 1765. A veiled threat and bold assertion of colonial resistance. No parts of His Majesty's dominions can be taxed without their consent. James Otis Jr., 1765. Emphasizes the legal principle of self-taxation through representation. The colonies raised, clothed, and paid during the last war near 25,000 men and spent many millions. Benjamin Franklin to Parliament, 1766, arguing that the colonies already contributed fairly to imperial defense. Political, economic, and symbolic value. A. Political significance. 1. The Stamp Act equal the first united opposition to British authority. The Stamp Act crisis was the first united colonial opposition to British authority, paving the way for broader revolutionary cooperation. 2. The Stamp Act Congress. It triggered the Stamp Act Congress, one of the earliest steps towards intercolonial unity and legislative resistance. 3. Debates on constitutional rights. The controversy catalyzed debates on constitutional rights, particularly over taxation without representation and the limits of parliamentary authority. B. Economic consequences. 1. The tax impact on colonists. The tax directly affected a wide range of colonists, especially the literate elite, merchants, and lawyers, making its effects broad and disruptive. 2. Colonial boycott and damaged British goods. Colonial boycotts of British goods damaged the British economy, particularly merchants and manufacturers, pressuring Parliament to repeal the Act. C. Symbolic implications. 1. The Act as a powerful symbol of tyranny. The Act became a powerful symbol of tyranny and imperial overreach. 2. Mass political mobilization. It galvanized mass political mobilization, including petitions, public protests, and riots. 3. Repeal of the Stamp Act. The repeal of the Stamp Act emboldened colonists, reinforcing the belief that collective action could resist imperial dictates. Four. Resisting the Stamp Act. 1765-1766. A comprehensive overview. A chronological summary of main events. A. May 1765. Patrick Henry introduces resolutions in the Virginia House of Burgesses rejecting Parliament's right to tax the colonies. B. Summer 1765. Boston artisans and tradesmen form the Loyal Nine to oppose the Stamp Act. C. August 14th, 1765. Effigy of Andrew Oliver hanged. That evening, his property is attacked by a mob led by Ebenezer McIntosh. D. August, October 1765. Violence and protest spread across the colonies. Stamp distributors are pressured to resign. E. October 1765. Delegates from 9 colonies convene the Stamp Act Congress in New York, affirming that Parliament has no authority to tax the colonies. F. October 31st, 1765. New York merchants initiate a boycott of British goods. G. November 1st, 1765. Official start date of the Stamp Act, rendered unenforceable by resistance. H. Late 1765, January 1766. Upper-class leadership reigns in mob violence, resuming colonial institutional functions. I. March 1766. Parliament repeals the Stamp Act but passes the Declaratory Act. Key characters. 1. Patrick Henry, Virginia orator and legislator, introduced radical anti-tax resolutions. 2. James Otis Jr., legal theorist of colonial rights, co-organizer of opposition, implicit. 3. Ebenezer McIntosh, shoemaker who led Boston's street protests and mob actions. 4. Andrew Oliver, Massachusetts stamp distributor, targeted and forced to resign. 5. Sons of Liberty, collective identity of anti-tax activists evolving from groups like the Loyal Nine. 6. Marquis of Rockingham, British Prime Minister who oversaw the repeal of the Act. 7. George Grenville, architect of the Stamp Act, displaced due to unpopularity. Quotations from key characters. Give me liberty or give me death. Patrick Henry, May 1765. Note: historically dubious in this context. The most effectual way to procure a repeal is to show them, the British, that nothing will execute it but downright force. New York Gazette, anonymous writer. A parliament has the power to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. Declaratory act, parliamentary assertion. Political, economic, and symbolic value. A. Political significance. 1. A challenge to the legitimacy of parliamentary sovereignty. The crisis challenged the legitimacy of parliamentary sovereignty in the colonies. 2. American unity and international cooperation versus the Stamp Act. Intercolonial cooperation via the Stamp Act Congress represented a major step towards American unity. 3. Popular resistance empowered elite leadership. Popular resistance empowered elite leadership, creating a precedent for future revolutionary organizations. B. Economic consequences. 1. The Stamp Act directly targeted a literate, commercially active class. The Stamp Act directly targeted a literate, commercially active class, lawyers, printers, and merchants. 2. Colonial boycott and the terror of British merchants. No importation boycotts showed the economic leverage of the colonies and terrified British merchants. 3. Halt of business and legal functions. Business and legal function altered due to the absence of stamped paper, forcing Parliament's hand. C. Symbolic significance. 1. The Stamp Act as a symbol of imperial overreach. The Stamp Act directly became a symbol of imperial overreach and a test of constitutional rights. 2. Mob actions. Mob actions, although violent, were channeled to preserve symbolic boundaries, attacking property but sparing life. 3. From street-level protest to legislative negotiation. The coordinated effort from street-level protest to legislative negotiation foreshadowed the political and rhetorical structure of the revolution. Conclusion. This paragraph illustrates the foundational mechanisms of colonial resistance: grassroots mobilization, elite cooptation, economic coercion, and ideological articulation. It is essential for understanding how 1765 functioned not only as a crisis, but as a laboratory for revolutionary practice and ideology. 5. Ideology, Religion and Resistance, 1765-1766. A comprehensive overview. A chronological summary of main events. A. 1765. The Stamp Act prompts Anglo-American to re-evaluate the imperial relationship, inspiring both secular and religious opposition. B. 1765-1766. The crisis fuels ideological and theological responses rooted in Enlightenment thought and Protestant religious fervor. C. Post-1766. Even after the Stamp Act's repeal, the ideological groundwork laid during the crisis continues to shape American political thought. Key characters. 1. John Locke. Enlightenment philosopher whose concept of natural right, life, liberty, property, and social contract theory justified resistance. 2. John Trenchard and Thomas Gordon. British opposition writers warning against parliamentary corruption and executive overreach, authors of Cato's Letters. 3. Joseph Priestley and James Burke. English radicals who influence American political discourse by articulating a binary struggle between liberty and tyranny. 4. Joseph Warren. Massachusetts physician and patriot, interpreted British policy as a conspiracy to provoke rebellion and impose military domination. The quotations from key characters. The Stamp Act induced some to imagine that Prime Minister Grenville intended, by this, to force the colonies into rebellion, and from thence to take occasion to treat them with severity, and by military power to reduce them to servitude. Joseph Warren. We are bound in conscience to stand fast in the liberty with which Christ has made us free. Unidentified minister. Christian Sparta. Samuel Adams advocated for America to become a Christian Sparta. Political, economic, and symbolic value. A. Political significance. 1. A philosophical resistance to British policy. Introduce philosophical resistance to British policy based on Enlightenment and oppositionist anti-corruption thinking. 2. Natural rights theory, Locke, and radical Whig ideology. Natural right theory, Locke, and radical Whig ideology, Trenchard and Gordon, form the backbone of colonial constitutional claims. 3. The idea of a conspiracy against liberty. The idea of a conspiracy against liberty created a lasting suspicion of centralized power and executive overreach. B. Economic consequences. 1. Protestant ministers' critiques of British luxury goods. Protestant ministers' critiques of British luxury goods dovetailed with calls from non-importation and frugality. 2. Morally legitimized economic resistance. This alignment morally legitimized economic resistance, giving religious sanction to boycotts and austerity. C. Symbolic implications. 1. Resistance took on quasi-religious dimensions. Resistance took on quasi-religious dimensions, portrayed as a moral struggle between virtue and corruption. 2. Clergy mobilization. Clergy mobilized large portions of the population, especially those outside the reach of elite pamphleteers. 3. The universal values of the American cause. Classical references to Greece and Rome, and religious sermons elevated the American cause, linking it to universal values and divine providence. The conclusion. This paragraph underscores that the American resistance to British policy during the Stamp Act crisis was not only material but deeply ideological and spiritual. It reveals how Protestant religiosity, classical republicanism, and Enlightenment thought coalesced to shape an enduring revolutionary culture of vigilance, moral righteousness, and political activism.